Maya Bennett's hands were shaking so hard she dropped her car keys twice before she got the door open. Behind her, a tow truck's yellow lights spun across the parking lot of the diner where she worked, throwing long shadows against the brick wall. A man in an orange vest was already hooking a chain under her car's back bumper. Her only car. The only thing that got her and her 6-year-old son, Caleb, to school and work and the free clinic on Tuesdays. Wait, please. I have the money. I just need one more day. Maya ran across the lot in her waitress shoes, her apron still tied around her waist, ketchup stain on the pocket. She grabbed the tow truck driver's arm. Please, my son is inside. He's watching. Please don't do this in front of him. The driver didn't even look at her. Lady, I don't make the rules. Bank says take it. I take it. Through the diner window, Caleb had his small hand pressed against the glass, his face pale, watching his mother chase after their car like it was a dog running away from home. That's when a black car pulled up right beside the tow truck. Slow, quiet, expensive. The window rolled down. A man Maya had never seen before leaned out, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her whole apartment building. Stop, he said. Just one word. But the tow truck driver froze like he'd heard a gunshot. Sir, this doesn't concern you. It does now. The man stepped out his car. He didn't even look at the tow truck driver. He looked at Maya, at her shaking hands, at the boy pressed against the diner glass. How much does she owe? That's not. Sir, I really can't just. How much? The tow truck driver told him a number. It was nothing to this man. Less than nothing. He pulled out his phone, typed something, and 30 seconds later the driver's phone buzzed in his pocket. The chain came off Maya's car. Maya stood there, frozen, not understanding what had just happened, not understanding why a stranger in an expensive suit had just saved the only thing keeping her family from falling apart completely. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for someone you don't even know? The man looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, something old and sad that Maya couldn't name yet. Then he almost smiled. Because somebody did it for me once, he said. A long time ago, when I had nothing either. He turned to walk back to his car. And that's when it happened. The moment nobody could have predicted. The moment that would change everything. He stopped, turned back around, looked at his own car, the black one, sitting there gleaming under the parking lot lights. And then he looked at the keys in his hand like he was seeing them for the first time. You know what? He said, and there was something strange in his voice now, something that sounded almost like a dare to himself. Take it. Maya blinked. Take what? My car. He walked over and pressed the keys in her hand before she could stop him. It's yours now. Consider it a joke gift. A random act of nothing. Something to laugh about later. I can't accept, sir. I don't even know your name. Doesn't matter, he said, already walking away, already disappearing into the night like he'd never been there at all. Enjoy it. Or sell it. I don't care. I've got 12 more just like it. And then he was gone. Maya stood in that parking lot holding a set of keys to a car she didn't understand, next to her own dying car that had almost just been taken away from her, while her son watched through the window with his mouth hanging open. She had no idea that the keys in her hand were about to change her entire life. She had no idea that the car sitting 3 spaces down, the one the stranger had just called nothing, was worth $25 million. And she had no idea that the man who gave it to her as a joke was about to become the most important person in her life, for reasons that had nothing to do with money at all. Before we go any further, if this story is already pulling you in, hit that subscribe button right now. So you don't miss what happens next, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It genuinely means the world and helps this channel keep telling stories like this one. Okay, let's go back to where it all began. 3 weeks earlier, Maya Bennett didn't know any billionaires. She didn't know anyone with money at all, really. She worked 6 days a week at Rosie's Diner on the edge of a small town in Ohio, waking up at 4:30 every morning to get Caleb ready for school before her shift started at 6. She was 29 years old and felt 50. Her husband had left when Caleb was 2, right after they found out their son had a heart condition that would need surgery someday, a surgery that cost more money than Maya would make in 5 years of double shifts. Some nights, she cried in the shower, so Caleb wouldn't hear her. Some nights, she didn't have the energy to cry at all. She just sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall, doing math in her head that never came out right no matter how many times she added it up. She had a system. Rent first, then Caleb's medicine, then the car payment, because without the car she couldn't get to work, and without work there was no rent, no medicine, nothing. Whatever was left over, which some months was nothing at all, went to food. She hadn't bought herself new clothes in 3 years. She hadn't been on a date in 5. She told herself she didn't have time to be lonely, that loneliness was a luxury for people who had already solved their real problems. The man in the black car, the one who would change everything, was named Grant Whitmore. Nobody in Maya's town would have recognized him even if they'd seen his face on television, because Grant Whitmore hated cameras. He owned one of the largest shipping and logistics companies in the country, a business empire his father had built and that Grant had multiplied by 10, but he almost never gave interviews, almost never showed up at galas, almost never let anyone get close enough to know who he really was. People who worked for him described him in 2 words, brilliant and cold. They didn't know about the box in his closet. Inside that box was a photograph, worn soft at the edges from being touched too many times. It showed a woman with tired eyes and a warm smile, standing outside a small house with a boy who looked exactly like Grant did at 7 years old. The woman was his mother. The boy was him. And the house was the last place they'd lived together before everything fell apart. Grant's father had walked out on them when Grant was 6, taking whatever money was left in the bank account with him. His mother had worked 3 jobs to keep them fed. She never once complained in front of him, not even when the lights got shut off, not even when they had to move in with her sister because they couldn't make rent. One winter, when Grant was 8, a stranger had done something his mother never forgot. Their car had broken down for the last time, the engine finally giving out after years of being held together with tape and prayer. A man at the mechanic shop, someone Grant's mother had never met before, had quietly paid to fix it. He never told them his name. He just said, "Somebody helped me once. Now I'm helping you. Someday you'll help somebody too." Grant's mother died when he was 22, before he'd made his first million, before he could ever pay her back for everything she'd sacrificed. She never got to see the empire he built. She never got to stop working 3 jobs. And Grant carried that like a stone in his chest every single day of his life, a debt he could never repay to the one person who deserved it most. So he built a strange, secret habit. Every few months, without telling anyone, not even his closest employees, Grant would drive through struggling neighborhoods and cities all across the country, looking for someone the way that stranger had once looked for his mother. Someone drowning. Someone who needed one hand reaching down at exactly the right moment. He never did it for credit. He never did it for cameras. He did it because it was the only way he knew how to talk to his mother anymore. The night he saved Maya's car from the tow truck, he hadn't planned any of it. He'd been driving through town after a business meeting had ended early, restless, unable to sleep, the way he always got around the anniversary of his mother's death. He saw a young woman running across a parking lot with panic on her face, and something in his chest twisted so hard it hurt to breathe. He didn't plan on giving her his car. That part surprised even him. But something about the little boy's face pressed against that window, something about the exact same fear he remembered feeling as a child, made him hand over the keys before his mind could catch up with his heart. He told himself it didn't matter. He had a garage full of cars worth more than most people's houses. He told himself he'd probably never see that woman or her son again. He was wrong about that. More wrong than he had ever been about anything in his life. Maya didn't drive the black car home that night. She was too afraid to even sit in it. Instead, she called her older sister, Danielle, the only family she had left in the state, and told her everything in a voice that kept cracking in the middle of sentences. "A stranger just gave you his car? Maya, that doesn't happen. That's not a real thing that happens to real people. I know how it sounds. Is it stolen? Is this a trick? Are you in some kind of danger right now?" "I don't think so." I don't know, Danielle. He seemed sad, like he needed to do it more than I needed him to. Danielle came over that same night, and the two of them sat in Maya's tiny kitchen, staring at the car keys on the table like they might bite. Caleb was already asleep, worn out from the excitement, clutching the stuffed dinosaur he'd had since he was a baby. "You have to sell it," Danielle finally said. "Whatever it's worth, sell it. Pay off what you owe. Fix Caleb's heart. This could be it, Maya. This could be the thing that saves you. Maya wanted to believe that. She wanted so badly to believe that something good could just fall in her lap after years of nothing but bad news and worse math. But something held her back, some old, tired part of her that had learned the hard way that things too good to be true usually were. The next morning she drove the black car, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, to the only place in town she trusted to tell her the truth. An old mechanic named Otis who had kept her dying car running for years out of pure kindness, charging her half of what he should have. Otis walked around the car twice without saying a word. Then he ran his hand along the hood like he was touching something sacred. Then he looked at Maya with an expression she had never seen on his face before. "Girl," he said quietly, "do you have any idea what you're driving?" "It's just a car." He said it was nothing. He said he had 12 more like it. Otis laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This isn't just a car, Maya. This is one of maybe 200 of these ever built in the entire world. I've seen pictures in magazines. Never thought I'd see one in my own shop." He pulled out his phone, typed something, and turned the screen toward her. Maya stared at the number on the screen for a long, long time. She read it 3 times, sure she was misunderstanding it, sure there had to be extra zeros that didn't belong. $25 million. Her legs went weak. She had to sit down on an old tire in the corner of the shop, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "That's not possible," she whispered. "That's not. He just gave it to me. He said it was a joke." "Some joke," Otis said, shaking his head. "Maya, listen to me. You need to be careful. Money like this, it changes things. It changes people. You need to find out who this man really is before you do anything else." That night, after Caleb was asleep, Maya sat at her kitchen table with her old laptop, the one with the cracked screen, and typed in every detail she could remember about the stranger. The suit, the way he talked, the sadness behind his eyes when he said somebody did it for me once. It took almost 2 hours, but eventually a photograph appeared on her screen that made her stomach drop. Grant Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Logistics. Estimated net worth, $4.3 billion. Maya closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, feeling something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't even fear exactly. It was the strange, dizzy feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff she hadn't known was there, wondering if the ground below was solid or if she was about to fall. She had no way of knowing that 400 miles away, in a glass office on the top floor of a skyscraper, Grant Whitmore was sitting alone at his desk, staring at a photograph of his mother, wondering why he couldn't stop thinking about a woman's face and a little boy pressed against a diner window. Neither of them knew yet that this was only the beginning. Maya didn't sell the car right away. Something in her, some stubborn, careful part of her heart, told her to wait, to understand what she was really holding before she let it go. 3 days after the mechanic shop, a black town car pulled up outside her apartment building. Not the $25 million car. A different one, driven by a man in a suit who introduced himself simply as Harold, Mr. Whitmore's assistant. "Mr. Whitmore would like to know if the car is working well for you," Harold said, standing stiffly by the car door. "He also wanted me to deliver this." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a check, not for the value of the car, for something much smaller but still more money than Maya had ever held in her hands at once. Enough to cover 3 months of Caleb's medicine. Enough to breathe for the first time in years. There's also a note, handwritten, just a few lines. "I don't know why I did what I did that night. I haven't stopped thinking about it since. If you ever want to talk, or if you need anything at all, Harold knows how to reach me. No pressure, no strings. I just wanted you to know I meant it." Maya read the note 4 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where she kept Caleb's birth certificate and the one photograph she had of her wedding day, the 2 most important pieces of paper in her whole life. She didn't call Grant Whitmore that week, or the next. Something about the whole situation felt like it belonged in a fairy tale, and Maya had learned a long time ago that fairy tales weren't built for people like her. But Caleb had other ideas. "Mommy, is the nice man who gave us the car going to come visit us?" he asked one night while Maya tucked him into bed. "I don't think so, baby. He was just being kind. Sometimes people are kind, and then you never see them again." That's sad, Caleb said, his small face serious in the lamplight. I wanted to say thank you. He saved our car. That means he saved you too, because you needed the car to go to work, and you need work so we can eat and I can get my medicine. Maya's throat tightened. Her son, only 6 years old, had already learned to understand the fragile chain that held their whole life together. He shouldn't have had to understand that. No child should have had to understand that. Maybe, she said softly, we could write him a letter instead. They wrote it together at the kitchen table, Caleb dictating while Maya wrote the words down in her careful handwriting, because Caleb's letters still came out backward sometimes. It was a simple letter. Thank you for saving our car. Thank you for being nice to my mom. She works very hard, and she never complains, even when she's tired. I hope you have a good day. From Caleb, age 6. Maya almost didn't send it. It felt too small, too plain, next to everything Grant Whitmore's world must have contained. But Caleb sealed the envelope himself, pressing his whole hand against the flap like he was sealing a promise, and Maya couldn't bring herself to take that moment away from him. She mailed it the next morning on her way to work. She had no idea that letter would end up sitting on Grant Whitmore's desk for 3 days before he could bring himself to open it, because something about a child's handwriting on an envelope made his hands shake in a way that $4 billion never could. She had no idea that when he finally did open it, alone in his enormous, empty office, he would read those simple words and put his head down on his desk and cry for the first time in 15 years. Grant Whitmore had built walls around himself so thick and so tall that even his own board of directors joked he didn't have a heart, just a very efficient calculator where one should be. He hadn't cried at his mother's funeral. He hadn't cried when his marriage fell apart 6 years earlier, a marriage built more on convenience and family expectation than on love, ending quietly with barely a headline. He hadn't cried when doctors told him, 2 years ago, that the same heart condition that had taken his mother far too young was something he now had to watch for it himself. But a 6-year-old boy's handwritten thank you note undid him completely. Because in it he didn't just see Caleb. He saw himself, at that same age, writing a similar letter to the mechanic who had fixed their car all those years ago, a letter his own mother had helped him write at their kitchen table, back when their kitchen table was 2 mismatched chairs and a card table borrowed from a neighbor. He kept the letter in his desk drawer from that day forward. He read it more times than he would ever admit to anyone. And slowly, quietly, without meaning for it to happen, Grant Whitmore began finding reasons to check on Maya Bennett and her son. First, it was small things. Harold delivering groceries left over from a company event. Then it was a scholarship fund Grant discovered that happened to cover pediatric heart surgery for children whose families couldn't afford it, a fund that happened to have Caleb's name at the very top of the list, though Grant made sure nobody could ever trace it back to him directly. Then, 3 months after the night in the parking lot, Grant Whitmore did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He got on a plane, flew to a small town in Ohio, and walked into Rosie's Diner in the middle of the lunch rush, wearing jeans and a plain jacket instead of a suit, hoping nobody would recognize him. Maya nearly dropped her tray of coffee cups when she saw him standing by the door. You, she said, her voice caught somewhere between shock and something warmer she didn't want to name yet. What are you doing here? I was in the area, Grant said, which was a lie so obvious they both almost laughed. You flew 400 miles to say you were in the area? I wanted to see how you were doing. And I wanted to thank Caleb for his letter in person, if that's all right. Maya studied his face for a long moment. Up close, without the expensive suit, without the black car, he didn't look like a billionaire at all. He looked tired. He looked like a man carrying something heavy that he'd been carrying alone for a very long time. Sit down, she finally said, nodding toward an empty booth. I get a break in 10 minutes. And Otis, my mechanic, will lose his mind when he finds out I serve coffee to Grant Whitmore. For the first time since she'd known him, Grant actually smiled. A real one. The kind that reached his eyes. That lunch turned into an hour. The hour turned into him staying in town for the whole weekend, staying at the one small motel off the highway instead of flying his private jet back, because something about sitting in a cracked vinyl booth listening to Maya talk about her son felt more honest than anything he'd experienced in years of boardrooms and galas and carefully managed relationships. He met Caleb properly that Saturday at the local park, and something in Grant's chest cracked wide open watching the boy run toward him yelling, "You're the car man. You're the car man," at the top of his lungs, throwing his small arms around Grant's legs before Grant even had time to crouch down. Nobody hugged Grant Whitmore like that. Nobody in his entire life had ever hugged him with that kind of pure, uncomplicated joy, without an agenda, without wanting something from him in return. He sat on a park bench that afternoon and watched Maya push Caleb on the swings, laughing in a way he could tell she didn't let herself do very often, and he understood, with sudden and terrifying clarity, that he was in serious danger of falling in love with a life he had absolutely no right to. If you're feeling this story the way I think you are right now, this is exactly the moment to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, because it only gets more emotional from here. Drop a comment and let me know if you think Grant is going to tell Maya the real reason he can't stay away. Now, back to the story. The weeks that followed felt, to Maya, like living inside someone else's life. Grant flew back to Ohio nearly every other weekend, always quiet about it, never bringing cameras, never bringing the trappings of his enormous wealth. He came in jeans. He came with small gifts for Caleb, usually something educational, a telescope, a book about dinosaurs, things that made it clear he was paying attention, that he remembered every small detail Caleb mentioned in passing. He never once brought up the $25 million car sitting untouched in Maya's rented garage space, and Maya never brought it up either. It sat between them like an unspoken question neither of them was ready to answer. Danielle noticed the change in her sister before Maya was willing to admit it to herself. "You're happy," Danielle said one evening, watching Maya hum while she folded laundry, something she hadn't done in years. "I mean actually happy. Not the fake happy you do for Caleb. Real happy." "It's not what you think," Maya said quickly. "He's just a friend. A very rich, very complicated friend." "Uh-huh. And does this very rich, very complicated friend look at every other woman the way he looks at you?" Maya didn't have an answer for that, because she'd started noticing it too. The way Grant's whole face changed when she walked into a room. The way he listened to her, really listened, like her words mattered more than any business deal waiting back in his office. The way he'd started asking Caleb's doctor detailed questions about the boy's heart condition, questions that went far beyond simple curiosity. She didn't know yet that Grant had quietly flown in the top pediatric cardiac surgeon in the country to consult on Caleb's case. She didn't know he'd already begun making arrangements, behind the scenes, to make sure Caleb's surgery, whenever it happened, would be handled by the very best doctors in the world, at no cost to Maya, structured so carefully through anonymous foundations that even Maya's own doctors wouldn't be able to trace where the arrangements had come from. She only knew that for the first time since her husband had left, she felt like the ground under her feet was solid instead of shifting, which was exactly when everything started to fall apart. It started with a phone call from a number Maya didn't recognize. A woman's voice, sharp and cold, introduced herself as Patricia Whitmore Cole, Grant's older sister. "I think it's time we had a conversation," Patricia said, "about what exactly you think you're doing with my brother." Maya's stomach dropped. "I'm not sure what you mean. I mean that you gave a struggling waitress and her sick kid access to my family's fortune, and now she's got her claws so deep into him, he's flying to Ohio every other weekend like a lovesick teenager. My brother is the CEO of a $4 billion company, Ms. Bennett. He has responsibilities, shareholders, a legacy to protect, and you are a distraction he cannot afford." "I never asked him for anything," Maya said, her hands shaking around the phone. "He gave me that car. I didn't ask for it. I tried to give it back. I don't care whose idea it was. What I care about is that our board is starting to ask questions, the press is starting to circle, and if this turns into some tabloid story about the billionaire and the waitress, it could tank our stock price and undo 40 years of my father's legacy. So I'm asking you, politely, one time, to walk away from my brother before this gets ugly for everyone involved. Especially for you and that boy of yours." The threat, thinly wrapped in politeness, landed exactly where it was meant to. Maya sat frozen at her kitchen table long after the call ended. Caleb's homework still spread out in front of her, her hands trembling with a fear she hadn't felt since the night the tow truck came for her car. She didn't tell Grant about the call. Not that week. Not the next. But something shifted in her after that. She started pulling back, just slightly, the way a person does when they've learned that good things eventually get taken away, that it's safer to leave before you get left. Grant, for his part, had no idea any of this was happening. He only knew that Maya's texts had gotten shorter, that she'd canceled their last 2 calls, blaming work, that something had closed off in her voice that he couldn't quite name but recognized instantly, because it was the same wall he himself had spent 15 years building. He flew out that weekend without calling ahead, something he'd never done before, driven by a fear he couldn't explain. He found Maya in the diner parking lot, loading grocery bags into her old, dying car, the one she'd insisted on keeping and driving, refusing to touch the black car, sitting untouched in storage, her face pale and tired in the evening light. "We need to talk," Grant said. "I know," Maya answered, and something in the way she said it made Grant's chest go tight with dread. She told him everything. The phone call, his sister's threats, the fear that had been sitting in her stomach for 2 weeks like a stone she couldn't swallow or spit out. Grant's face went through several emotions in quick succession. Shock, then something darker, something Maya had never seen on him before. "She had no right," he said quietly. "She had absolutely no right to call you." "Maybe she's right, though," Maya said, her voice breaking. "Maybe I'm a distraction. Maybe this was always going to fall apart the second the real world caught up with us." "Don't say that." Grant closed the distance between them in the parking lot, taking her hands in his, the same hands that had once been shaking around a tow truck driver's arm months earlier. "Maya, listen to me. I have spent 15 years building walls around myself so thick that nobody could get close enough to hurt me again after I lost my mother. And then you and Caleb walked into my life through a parking lot in a car I gave away on a whim. And for the first time since she died, I actually feel like a person instead of a company. I'm not walking away from that because my sister is worried about a stock price. But what if it does get worse? What if the press finds out? What if it hurts your company, your family?" "Then it hurts them," Grant said, and there was a fierceness in his voice that surprised them both. "I have given that company everything for 15 years. Every holiday, every birthday, every single piece of myself, try to fill a hole that money was never going to fill. I am done sacrificing the one thing that has ever actually made that hole feel smaller." Maya stood in that parking lot, tears running down her face, feeling something crack open in her chest that had been locked shut since the day her husband walked out the door and never came back. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too," Grant admitted. "But I would rather be scared and standing here with you than safe and empty in that office for the rest of my life." They didn't kiss that night. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter than that, deeper than that. 2 people who had both been broken by loss finally admitting they didn't want to face the rest of their lives alone anymore. But Patricia Whitmore Cole was not finished. Not even close. And what she would do next would threaten to tear apart everything Grant and Maya had carefully built in ways neither of them could have possibly seen coming. Because Patricia wasn't just worried about a stock price. She was hiding a secret of her own, one that connected to Maya's family in a way nobody in that parking lot could have ever imagined. If you want to know exactly how these 2 worlds are about to collide, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next changes everything you think you understand about this story. Now let's keep going. Patricia Whitmore Cole had not always been cold. There had been a time, decades earlier, when she was a young woman working 2 jobs of her own, before their father's business had exploded into the empire it eventually became, before money had wrapped itself around every relationship in the Whitmore family like ivy strangling a tree. But that was a long time ago, before their father cut deals that weren't always clean, before one of those deals, 20 years earlier, quietly ruined a small trucking company owned by a hardworking man named Frank Bennett, Maya's father. Maya had been 9 years old when her father's business collapsed. She barely remembered the details, only the fights her parents had in hushed voices after she was supposed to be asleep, only the day the bank came to take their house, only her father's face afterward, a face that never fully recovered, a man who died 4 years later of what the doctors called a heart attack, but what Maya's mother always quietly called a broken heart instead. Patricia knew all of this. She had seen her father's private files, the ones buried deep in old company archives, the ones that showed exactly how the Whitmore fortune had grown, in part by crushing smaller companies like Frank Bennett's without a second thought. When Maya Bennett's name first crossed Patricia's desk, connected to her brother, Patricia had run a background check out of pure caution, the kind any protective sister might run. And that was when she found it. The old company records, the name Bennett, tied to a trucking company her father had bankrupted decades ago through practices that wouldn't have survived today's regulations. A young girl named Maya, 9 years old at the time, whose father had died for years after losing everything. Patricia hadn't called Maya to protect the stock price. That had been a convenient lie, one she told even to herself. She had called because she was terrified that if Grant and Maya got any closer, if this relationship became public, if anyone dug deep enough, the entire ugly history would resurface. And this time, it wouldn't just be a stock price at risk. It would be the Whitmore family name. And worse, it might mean Maya would learn the truth. That the very family whose fortune had rescued her from a tow truck was the same family responsible for destroying her father and, in a real sense, her entire childhood. Patricia decided the safest thing to do was end things before that truth could ever surface. But 2 weeks after her failed attempt to scare Maya away, Patricia discovered something that changed everything. Digging through the old files one more time, trying to find proof solid enough to permanently end her brother's relationship, she found something she hadn't expected. A handwritten letter, decades old, tucked into the back of an old file box. A letter from her own father, written near the end of his life, addressed to a lawyer, instructing him to quietly locate the family of Frank Bennett and arrange for a settlement. Guilt money, an apology he'd never had the courage to deliver in person. The letter had never been sent. The instructions had never been carried out. Whitmore Sr. had died before he could make things right, and the letter had simply been filed away and forgotten in the chaos after his death. Patricia sat alone in her office for a long time holding that letter, feeling the weight of a debt her family had owed for 20 years and never paid. She thought about calling Maya to apologize. She thought about burning the letter and pretending she'd never found it. In the end, she didn't either. Instead, she called her brother. "Grant," she said, her voice tighter than usual. "We need to talk. About Frank Bennett." Grant had never heard that name before in his life. "Who?" "Maya's father," Patricia said quietly. "Sit down. There's something you need to know, and I don't know how to tell you gently, because there isn't a gentle way to say that our family destroyed hers." Grant sat frozen in his office for nearly an hour after that phone call. The letter Patricia had sent over sitting on his desk, his father's handwriting staring back at him like an accusation. He thought about the parking lot, the tow truck, the moment he'd handed Maya his car keys without knowing why, some invisible thread pulling him toward her before he understood what it meant. He wondered, sitting there, if some part of him had always known, if somewhere deep down, some inherited guilt had been quietly steering him toward Maya Bennett long before he understood the connection between their families. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, he had made a decision. He flew to Ohio without calling ahead, the same way he had weeks earlier, but this time the drive from the airport felt longer, heavier, every mile bringing him closer to a conversation he was terrified to have. Maya opened her apartment door and immediately knew something was wrong. Grant's face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept, and he was holding an old, yellowed letter in his hands like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to know that I didn't find out until last night, and that I would have told you the second I did." He told her everything. Her father's trucking company, the Whitmore family's role in its collapse, the unsent letter of apology his own father had written and never delivered, 20 years too late. Maya sat very still on her couch, her face unreadable, while Grant spoke, while decades of quiet grief and unanswered questions about her father's death suddenly found a shape, a cause, a name. When he finished, the apartment was silent for a long, long time. "Say something," Grant finally whispered. "Please." "My father died thinking he'd failed us," Maya said, her voice shaking. He died believing it was his fault, that he hadn't been smart enough, hadn't worked hard enough. My mother used to say he stopped smiling after the business closed. He just stopped. And it was your family the whole time. It was your family that took that from him. From us. I know, Grant said. And I understand if you need me to leave. If you need to never see me again. I would understand that completely. Maya looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. And for a moment Grant was certain he had lost her. Certain that the truth had done exactly what his sister feared it would do. Destroyed the one good thing in his life beyond repair. But then Maya said something he never expected. You didn't do this, she said quietly. You were a child when this happened. Same as me. You didn't destroy my father's company. Your father did, and your father is gone, and he never got the chance to make it right. But you're here. You flew out here in the middle of the night to tell me the truth, even though it might cost you everything with me. That's not the same man who ruined my father's life. That's not the same family at all. I still don't know how to make this right, Grant said. There's no amount of money that fixes 20 years of grief. No, Maya agreed. There isn't. But you can start by not disappearing on me right when things get hard. That's what everyone else in my life has done. My husband, even my own father, in a way, when he gave up on himself after the business failed. If you really want to make something right, don't run away from the hard parts. Stay. Grant crossed the small apartment and knelt in front of her, taking her hands the way he had that night in the parking lot months earlier. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Not now. Not ever, if you let me stay. That night marked a turning point, but the story was far from over. Because 2 days later, Caleb collapsed at school during recess, his heart finally reaching the crisis point his doctors had been warning about for years, and Maya and Grant found themselves racing to a hospital together, terrified in a way that had nothing to do with money or family secrets at all. Only the pure, raw fear of possibly losing the little boy who had brought them together in the first place. If your heart is pounding right now the way mine was writing this next part, make sure you're subscribed and following along, because what happens in that hospital room is going to test everything these two people have built. Let's continue. The hospital hallway smelled like antiseptic and fear. Maya paced back and forth outside the operating room, her whole body shaking, unable to sit still, unable to think about anything except her son's small chest rising and falling on a hospital bed somewhere behind those doors. Grant had chartered a private jet to fly in the same pediatric cardiac surgeon he'd quietly arranged weeks earlier, a woman considered the best in the entire country, and she had arrived just in time, taking one look at Caleb's charts and declaring that emergency surgery could not wait even another day. He's going to be okay, Grant said, though his voice betrayed how frightened he was too. Dr. Reyes is the best in the world. I made sure of that. You knew, Maya said suddenly, turning to look at him. You knew this was coming. That's why you brought in the specialist weeks ago. That's why you asked all those detailed questions. I didn't want to scare you, Grant admitted. His doctor told me privately that his condition was worsening faster than expected. I just wanted to make sure that whenever this moment came, he'd have the very best chance possible. I should have told you. I'm sorry. Maya didn't have the energy to be angry. All she had room for in her heart right now was fear, and underneath the fear, a strange, fragile gratitude that she wasn't standing in this hallway alone. Danielle arrived an hour later, breathless from rushing straight from work, and the three of them sat together in the waiting room chairs that never felt comfortable no matter how you position yourself, watching the clock crawl forward one impossibly slow minute at a time. 6 hours. That's how long the surgery took. 6 hours of Maya gripping Grant's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. 6 hours of silent prayers and half-finished cups of terrible hospital coffee. 6 hours that felt like 6 years. When Dr. Reyes finally walked out of the operating room, still in her scrubs, exhaustion and something softer written across her face, Maya's whole body went rigid with terror, bracing for the worst news of her life. He's stable, Dr. Reyes said, and the words seemed to take a full second to land, like Maya's brain needed extra time to believe them. The surgery went better than we hoped. His heart is repaired. He's going to need time to recover, but Maya, your son is going to be okay. Maya collapsed into Grant's arms, sobbing, Months and years of held-back fear finally breaking loose all at once. Grant held her there in the middle of that hospital hallway, his own eyes wet, feeling something in his chest finally, truly heal after 15 years of carrying his mother's memory like an open wound. They were allowed to see Caleb an hour later, still groggy from anesthesia, tubes and wires connected to his small body, but breathing steady and strong. His eyes fluttered open and found his mother's face first, then Grant's, standing right beside her. "Carman," Caleb whispered weakly, the corner of his mouth lifting into the beginning of a smile. "Did you stay?" "I stayed," Grant said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere, buddy. I promise you that." Maya looked at Grant over her son's hospital bed, and in that moment, something settled between them completely, a certainty that had been building slowly for months, finally locking into place. This wasn't a fairy tale anymore, wasn't a strange story about a stranger's random car and impossible money. This was simply two broken families finding a way to heal each other, one small, terrifying, beautiful moment at a time. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon in the same small park where Grant had first hugged a little boy who called him Carman, Maya Bennett stood in a simple white dress that she had chosen herself. Nothing flashy, nothing that felt like it belonged to a billionaire's world instead of her own. Caleb, fully recovered, his cheeks full of color again, his energy back in full force, stood beside Grant at the front of a small gathering of close friends and family, proudly holding the rings on a small pillow he had insisted on carrying himself. Patricia was there too, sitting in the front row, her relationship with Maya, still healing, still careful, but real in a way it hadn't been before. She had personally overseen the creation of a scholarship fund in Frank Bennett's name, helping struggling small business owners the way nobody had helped her own father when he needed it most. It didn't erase the past, but it was a start. And sometimes a start is the most honest kind of apology there is. Otis the mechanic sat near the back, having driven 3 hours just to be there, still occasionally shaking his head in disbelief at how a $25 million car and a broken-down tow truck had somehow led to this exact moment. As Maya walked down the short grassy aisle toward Grant, she thought about her father, about how much she wished he could have seen this, could have known that the family who once broke his heart had somehow, impossibly, become the family that mended hers. Grant took her hands the way he had that first night in the parking lot, and again in her apartment the night he told her the truth, and he looked at her with the same quiet, overwhelming emotion that had been building in his chest since the moment he first saw her running across that lot in fear. "I gave you a car as a joke," he said softly, just for her to hear, though everyone gathered could see the emotion on his face. "It turned out to be the only thing I've ever given away that actually gave something back. You didn't just take that car, Maya. You took the empty place in my chest that I thought would stay empty forever, and you filled it. You and Caleb both." Maya's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time, the kind she'd almost forgotten how to cry. "You saved my car that night," she whispered back. "But what you really did was remind me that good things are still allowed to happen to people like us, that we hadn't used up all our luck, that somewhere out there, the world still had a little bit of kindness left, waiting to find us at exactly the right moment." They were married under an open sky, no rain in sight, sunlight breaking warm and golden across the grass, surrounded by the family they had built out of grief, honesty, and one impossibly generous, impossibly foolish, impossibly perfect decision made in a parking lot on a night neither of them would ever forget. The $25 million car, the one that started all, sat quietly in Otis's shop from that day forward, fully restored, never sold. Maya kept it not because of what it was worth, but because of what it represented. The night a stranger's small act of kindness had cracked open 2 broken hearts and given them both a reason to believe in second chances again. And every year, on the anniversary of that night, Grant and Maya donated exactly enough money to cover one struggling family's rent, their medical bills, or their car payment, choosing someone new each time, never asking for thanks, never revealing their names. Because somebody had once done it for a scared, hungry little boy on a cold winter night. And now, finally, it was their turn to keep the kindness moving forward. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved me writing it, please make sure you're subscribed, drop a comment telling me your favorite part, and share this with someone who needs a reminder tonight that good things can still happen to good people. Thank you for watching until the very end.